My name is Grace Ellen Weatherly. I'm 70 years old. I was born in 1955 in a town so small they didn't even bother to paint the name on the water tower. We had a post office, a grain mill, and a schoolhouse with a tin roof that sang when it rained. My father ran a hardware store, and my mother, well, she ran everything else. My childhood smelled like pine floors, corn chowder, and cold wind through cracked windows. I met Robert in high school. He was the shy, intelligent kind, always fiddling with radios and asking questions no one else thought to ask. We married young before we knew who we were and found out together. Built a life slowly, inch by inch, paycheck to paycheck. By the time we bought the house on Elmwood Avenue, we had 2 children and a firm belief that things were only going to get better. That house, it was our third baby. We painted every wall ourselves. We argued over wallpaper and laughed while planting tulips in the front yard. That was 1987. For 38 years, that house was mine. I cooked thousands of meals in that kitchen, taught my son how to tie his shoes in the hallway, held my daughter through chicken pox, breakups, and bad dreams. Robert and I danced to Johnny Mathis records in the living room when we thought no one was watching. I repainted the porch every 5 years. I hung wind chimes, quilted on the sun porch, and read paperback mysteries in the old clawfoot tub. Life left its fingerprints everywhere. Robert passed away 12 years ago, quietly, on a Saturday morning. We were making pancakes when he gripped the counter and said, "Gracie, I think," and then he just slumped. The doctor said it was fast. I'm glad for that. I still keep his robe hung on the back of the door, not because I think he'll come back, but because sometimes I forget he won't. After Robert, the house felt too big, too quiet. My children were grown by then. Michael was in Chicago working with some startup. Ellen, my Ellen, was married to Peter, a man who wore turtlenecks and believed strongly in Scandinavian design. They lived in a cramped apartment with 2 toddlers and dreams of something better. So, when the housing market dipped and the opportunity arose, we did what we thought was smart, practical, loving. I signed the house over to them. It wasn't a full gift, not exactly. We structured it as a donation of equity to help them with the mortgage. It made things simpler financially. The idea was I would continue living in the house. My room, well, what became my room, was the old office at the back of the house, small, square, with a single window that faced the fence. It had once been my sewing room, then Robert's study. Now it was mine again, but different. They called it Granny's room, which made me feel like a decorative plate on a shelf. I told myself it was just temporary, a stepping stone. Ellen said, "Mom, you can stay here as long as you want." But over time it became clear. I wasn't staying. I was visiting. And visits by their nature must end. The first thing to go were the dishes, not thrown out, not broken, just relocated. I came into the kitchen one day and found my blue-rimmed plates had been replaced with stark white ceramic squares. "They stack better," Peter said. "It's more efficient." The crocheted doilies vanished. My copper-bottom pots moved to the attic. The books Robert gave me on our anniversaries were boxed and stored in the basement. Every time I looked for something, it was just gone. Ellen called it decluttering. Peter called it optimizing. I called it erasure. They never raised their voices. They never locked me out. But little by little, the house shifted under my feet. The living room smelled like eucalyptus and soy candles now. The sun porch was converted into a home office, filled with dual monitors and a standing desk. The porch swing was taken down. "Too visually heavy," Peter said. My memories, it seemed, were too heavy for their minimalist aesthetic. Meals changed, too. I used to make cornbread from scratch, mashed potatoes with the skins left on. roast chicken that made the whole house warm with scent. Now we had takeout from a fusion place or kale salad in eco-friendly containers. Once, I tried to make Robert's favorite beef stew, spent all day peeling and chopping and simmering. Peter came home and said, "Oh, did something spill?" I stopped cooking. Even my coffee changed. I liked it strong, percolated in the old enamel pot I'd used for decades. Peter brought in a gleaming machine with pods that hissed and blinked like a spaceship. It made weak coffee, and I hated it. But it took up the counter space where my old pot used to sit. So that was that. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I told myself I was overreacting, that I should be grateful that this was family. But gratitude doesn't keep you warm when you're invisible. One night, I couldn't sleep. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, craving a cup of tea. I opened the cabinet and stared. Not one cup was mine. Not one plate. The kettle was gone. I rummaged through drawers until I found a mismatched mug, the kind they give out at corporate retreats. I boiled water in a saucepan. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the cold beauty of someone else's taste. That's when I started counting. 38 years, 5 coats of porch paint, 2 children, 1 marriage, 7 dogs, 100 holidays, 10,000 breakfasts. It wasn't just a house. It was the story of my life, and now I was a guest in it. I said nothing. I did nothing. But I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. It was a Tuesday morning, gray sky, cold light leaking through the slats of the blinds. Peter had already left for work, and Ellen was upstairs coaxing the twins through an online science class. I sat in the breakfast nook with a crossword I'd already filled out yesterday, pretending I had somewhere to go later, somewhere other than memory. The attic was calling. Not literally, of course, but I had felt something tighten in my chest the night before. An ache that wasn't physical, not quite. I hadn't gone up there in months. My knees made the stairs less friendly than they used to be, but I had a feeling, a tug. Something inside me said, "Go." So I did. I wrapped a scarf around my head, buttoned my cardigan, still kept near the door, though no one else wore cardigans anymore, and creaked up the narrow stairs with the caution of a woman who knows she won't be forgiven for a fall. I reached the door, pushed it open, and the smell hit me. Wood dust. Age. Summer heat long since stored up and forgotten. The box was there, exactly where I remembered it, labeled in my own handwriting, faded but still legible. China, Mama. I knelt down slowly, grateful I still could. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. I peeled back the lid and saw it, the fine, yellowed paper still cradling the set. Cups with rosebuds and gold trim, saucers that still bore the faint impression of holiday teaspoons. The sugar bowl with the tiniest chip on the rim, a flaw I remembered from age 10 when I dropped it and cried until my mother wrapped me in her apron. My mother's china. It was a gift from her mother when she married in 1940, a time when such things were bought slowly, one piece at a time, and guarded like treasure. This wasn't vintage chic. It wasn't retro. It was history. It was ceremony. It was mine, and I hadn't seen it in almost 3 years. Ellen had asked if we could store it. She said it made the kitchen too busy. Peter wanted a monochrome look. Simplify, they said. Modernize. I didn't argue then. I said, "Of course, honey." And they wrapped it all up and put it here. But that morning, I took it down. It took me several careful trips, both for the china and for myself. I used a laundry basket and lined it with towels. I set each piece in place like I was arranging flowers for a casket. By mid-morning, I had them all in the kitchen, on the table, resting on a pale blue tablecloth no one had seen in years. The kettle, my old copper one, was still there, behind the cleaning supplies under the sink. They'd just pushed it aside. I filled it with water and set it on the stove. I opened the tin of Earl Grey I had stashed in the back of the pantry. The scent of bergamot hit me like a friend's familiar voice. I had just placed 3 teacups on matching saucers when Peter walked in. He was holding a tablet and wearing his cycling shoes. Click, click, click across the tile floor. He stopped mid-step, looked at the table, and frowned. "Oh," he said, blinking slowly. "Is that all?" He walked over, picked up one of the cups like it was part of a thrift store exhibit, turned it over, read the back stamp. "Real bone china?" I nodded. "From my mother. She got it in 1940, hand-painted." He gave a tight smile. "Huh. Well, you can throw it away if you want. We've got too much of the past in the house as it is." Then he grabbed a protein bar, muttered something about meetings, and walked out. He didn't mean it cruelly. I believe that. Peter is a man of facts and function. He doesn't understand sentiment unless it's embedded in a spreadsheet. But the words landed like stones anyway. Too much of the past. I sat down. The kettle hissed behind me. I didn't get up to pour the tea. I just stared at the cups. I thought about my mother, how she used to polish the cups before guests arrived, how she placed them with ritual precision, how she told me that anything worth keeping was worth taking care of. She didn't mean just dishes, and neither did I. That night I didn't sleep, not really. I lay under the quilt Robert's mother made us in '73, tracing the stitches with my fingertips, trying to keep the heat of the moment at bay. But the words kept circling back. Too much of the past in the house. I watched the ceiling until moonlight shifted to the amber of the street lamp. Then I swung my legs over the side of the bed, pulled on a cardigan, and walked barefoot through the hall. I paused outside Ellen and Peter's room. Their door was closed, and behind it, the low thrum of the white noise machine they used for the twins. I moved past it without a sound. The box was still in the kitchen, where I'd left it after dinner. No one had touched the china. No one had asked about the kettle. The only thing that had moved was the protein bar wrapper Peter left next to the sink. I wrapped the teacups in towels 2 at a time. The sugar bowl, the cream pitcher, the plates. Everything went gently, carefully, back into the box. It wasn't shame or anger that guided my hands. It was clarity. I didn't belong to this version of the house. Not in the kitchen, not in the living room with the oversized wall-mounted TV, not in the sun porch-turned workstation, and not, certainly not, at the dinner table where family conversations were now conducted through apps and earbuds. I carried the box down the hall back to my room, the old office. It was the only space that hadn't been remodeled. Still had the walnut trim around the windows, the squeaky drawer in the built-in desk. I set the box on the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and opened it once more. There, in the dim light, I reached in and pulled out the sugar dish. I held it in my lap for a long time, remembering the way my grandmother's kitchen smelled of lemon oil and cloves. She used this dish every Sunday, always made a pot of sweet tea that sat on a trivet with a stitched doily. As a girl, I thought it was magical, the way she spooned sugar from this little bowl and turned ordinary tea into something warm and healing. I felt her with me, right then, not in a ghostly way, but rooted in the weight of the porcelain in my hands. The past wasn't clutter, it was continuity, connection, and now it was packed in a box beside my twin bed. But I wasn't grieving, not anymore. I was planning. The next morning, I rose before the twins logged in for their classes and Peter left for work. I made toast in the old toaster I'd kept in my closet, hidden from their decluttering spree. I buttered it, poured myself a cup of weak pod brewed coffee, and took both to the back porch. I watched the sky turn from violet to gold. Then I got dressed. Slacks, blouse, low-heeled shoes. I even added a brooch, the silver one shaped like a lily that Robert bought me on our 20th anniversary. I brushed my hair, dabbed on a bit of powder, and folded the quilt at the foot of my bed. Before I left the room, I pulled out a legal pad and made a list. Packing store boxes, tape, tissue paper labels. It was time to start sorting. Not junk, not trash, legacy. The packaging store smelled like cardboard and ink. It sat on the edge of town in a squat brick building that hadn't seen new paint in decades. Inside, rolls of bubble wrap stood like silent sentinels. Racks of tape, labels, folders, and crates lined the aisles. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like a warehouse of possibilities. A young man with a nose ring and a barcode scanner gave me a polite nod. Need help finding anything, ma'am? Just boxes today, I said, and paper, and tape, the good kind. He gestured toward the right aisle. I took a cart, which squeaked with every step, and rolled through the store slowly, examining the sizes. I chose with care. Mediums for books, smalls for fragile things, a flat wide box for the wedding quilt, tissue paper, a thick roll of clear tape, markers. I paid in cash. Back at the house, I waited until Ellen took the twins to piano lessons. Peter was working from the basement today. I didn't want questions, not yet. I closed my door, laid out the supplies, and started with the top drawer of my nightstand. The quilted cards from Robert, one for each birthday. I tied them with ribbon. My mother's recipe book, with grease-stained pages and notes in her looping script, wrapped in cloth. My wedding veil, yellowed and delicate, still smelling faintly of cedar. From the closet came the embroidery, monograms for linens, unfinished samplers from the 70s, hand-stitched pillowcases with scalloped trim. I folded each one, smoothing the fabric like it was someone's hair. Into the boxes they went, lined with tissue, marked in permanent ink, heirloom textiles. Then the books, not all of them, but the ones that mattered, the ones with underlined passages, margin notes, first names on the inside cover. I had read them all. Some I had read aloud to my children when they were still small enough to climb into my lap. Some had dried tears pressed into their pages. I packed them spine down, like soldiers in retreat. Next came the table linens, the embroidered cloth we only used at Christmas, the crocheted runners my aunt made before her eyes went bad, the napkins I'd hand-stitched before Ellen was born, all folded and labeled, dining legacy finally, the letters, dozens, tied in bundles, notes Robert wrote me in the first year of our marriage, cards from my mother, school drawings from the kids. I had kept them in a carved wooden box under the bed. I hadn't opened it in years. When I did, the scent of time wafted up. Ink, paper, and something more. I cried, but quietly. It took me 3 days to finish packing everything. I didn't rush. Every item was a conversation. Every object carried breath. By the time Ellen noticed, the shelves in my room looked bare. "Mom, are you doing a clean out?" "Something like that," I replied. She peeked into a box. "You're not throwing this away, are you?" "No," I said. "It's all going somewhere it'll be seen, not stored." She tilted her head but didn't press. I could see the wheels turning. She didn't yet understand that her house, her version of it, was becoming a museum without the memories, and I, the curator, was leaving with the soul of the collection. That night, I sat in my room with the boxes stacked around me. Not hidden, not hoarded, preserved, marked, ready. The first step had been taken, not out of spite, out of love for what was lost and what I still had the power to protect. I began asking around quietly, not for storage, not for donations, for purpose. The internet helped, sure, but it was too wide, too fast. I didn't want to sell anything. I didn't want my mother's teacups ending up in a thrift shop window between plastic toys and mismatched mugs. I wanted someone who would understand, someone who would listen. So I started local. The woman at the library, Joan, was the first person I asked. She'd been shelving books at the main branch since the Reagan administration and knew every teacher and retired principal in town. When I explained what I had, heritage pieces, authentic and cataloged, she tilted her glasses and said, "Try Natalie. She runs a school museum project over at Lincoln Elementary." I called the number she gave me. Natalie sounded young, a little breathless, like she was always doing 6 things at once. When I mentioned the china set, she got very quiet. "You mean actual 1940s bone china? Hand-painted?" "Yes, and embroidery, letters, recipes, tablecloths." There was a pause. Then, "Would you be willing to meet?" 2 days later, she came by. Natalie wore a thick scarf and corduroy overalls. She looked barely 30, with a halo of curls pinned up messily and large eyes that scanned everything like she was cataloging it for memory. I invited her into my room, my corner of the museum, in waiting. She didn't touch anything at first, just walked around slowly, looked, breathed it in. "This," she said finally, resting a hand on the box labeled Dining Legacy. "This is exactly what our kids need to see. They think history started with the internet." I opened the box and showed her the dishes. She picked up a saucer with reverence. "They'll never believe these were for everyday use. They're so delicate." "They weren't for every day," I said. "They were for Sundays, anniversaries, pie after funerals. They marked things." She blinked quickly, then smiled. "I want to use these in the school exhibit. Not just show them, build stories around them. I can make signs with the years, print photos if you have them. I'll even credit the donor, you, if that's okay." I nodded. Later that week, I brought over the first set. She took it from my hands like it was an heirloom crown. I watched her load it into her car, wrapped in layers of bubble wrap and care. Before she closed the trunk, she paused and said, "You know, most people assume kids don't care. But they do. Once you show them the thread, the connection, they lean in." She added, almost as an afterthought, "I'll put up a sign with your name on it, Grace Ellen Weatherly. It deserves to be there." And then, suddenly, she was crying. Not sobbing, just tears rolling down her cheeks, as if the weight of inheritance had found her all at once. I reached out, touched her sleeve. "That's why I called you." A week passed, maybe more. I spent my mornings folding linens, checking boxes, cataloging memories in quiet, methodical rhythms. At night, I drank tea from a plain gray mug in my room, not because I had to, but because I had chosen to. Something had shifted inside me. I no longer waited to be invited into the main rooms of the house. I no longer lingered by the kitchen door, hoping for an open chair or casual welcome. I no longer asked. Then one Thursday afternoon, Peter walked into the kitchen. I heard his voice through the hallway, louder than usual. "Ellen? Hey, have you seen the cabinet stuff? Where's all the old, like," he paused, "the old dishes and, the stuff that was in the side cupboard, the junk drawer, the teacups?" I heard Ellen murmur something. Footsteps followed. A door opened, then another. He stepped into the hallway. I was folding a blanket at the end of the staircase. "Grace?" he asked, brows drawn together in polite confusion. "Hey, did you happen to move some of the old things? That weird old china and whatnot?" I looked up from the blanket, smiled gently. "I did." He hesitated. "Where is it? We were thinking of donating it, or maybe, I don't know, doing a garage sale." I kept folding. "There's no need. I've already taken care of it." "Taken care of it?" I met his gaze calmly. "You said it yourself. There's too much of the past in the house." I agreed. "So, I made space." He blinked. Twice. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "Don't worry," I added. "It didn't go in the trash. It went where it would matter." He nodded slowly, clearly not sure whether he should be relieved or alarmed. Behind him, I could hear Ellen calling one of the twins. Life went on, routine unbothered. But in the heart of the house, the kitchen cabinet stood a little more hollow, the walls a little plainer. Later that night, I walked past the dining room and saw Peter standing by the sideboard. The cabinet doors were open. His fingers trailed along the inside shelf where the delicate glassware once lived. It was empty now. Even the shelf liner was gone. He closed the doors quietly, didn't say a word. I went back to my room and lit a candle, not because of any ritual, just to mark the moment. Saturday arrived with one of those clear, crisp mornings that make everything seem newly washed. The sun filtered through the blinds in thin, golden lines, casting soft rectangles on my wooden floor. I opened the window slightly to let the cool in. There was a quiet to the house, a rare one. Ellen had taken the twins to soccer, and Peter was off cycling, no doubt in some sponsored jersey that made him feel young. It was time. I opened my closet and pulled out the final crate. Inside were the last pieces, folded recipe cards in my mother's faded handwriting, rolls of embroidery thread wound around wooden bobbins, and dozens of black and white photographs bound in twine. Some dated back to the 1920s, men in wide-brimmed hats, women standing proudly beside clotheslines, children holding cats with stiff arms. This was more than memory. It was evidence. I carried the crate to the front door and paused. I'd never walked out of this house with purpose quite like this, not since Robert died, and maybe not even before. But I didn't hesitate. I loaded the crate into the trunk and drove down Elmwood Avenue with the windows half open. The district library sat between the courthouse and an old Methodist church. Its steps were worn, but the bricks were solid, and the bell in the clock tower still rang every hour. Inside, I asked for the local history archivist. Her name was Martha, a small woman with sharp eyes and wide shoulders who reminded me of a blue heron. "You called about a donation?" she asked. "Yes," I said, setting the crate down gently. "These belong to a family that lived in this town for 3 generations." Martha crouched and opened the box. She held up the embroidery, then one of the photographs. Her face softened. "Do you have a name you'd like to attach to the collection?" "Grace Ellen Weatherly. That was my grandmother's name, and mine." Martha nodded slowly. "This will be part of our regional life archive. It won't be in a vault. It'll be available for school projects, local exhibits, and genealogical research. Is that what you had in mind?" "It is," I said. I wanted to make sure the threads didn't break. That afternoon, I walked back into the house. It felt lighter, not because something was missing, but because I had chosen what stayed and what didn't. Peter walked past me carrying a laptop. He glanced into the living room, as if still sensing something out of place. "You reorganizing again?" I smiled faintly. "Not reorganizing, reclaiming." He didn't ask what I meant. That was fine. Some stories weren't for them. That night, I took out a blank journal. I wrote down the titles of the recipes I'd donated, the colors of the thread, the names in the photographs. I wasn't erasing myself. I was editing the house, removing my chapters and placing them somewhere they'd be read, somewhere they'd be safe. It was near dusk when Ellen finally asked. I was in the garden, what was left of it. The raised beds Robert built had long since been covered in gravel, replaced by a modular patio Peter had ordered online. Only the hydrangeas remained. I pruned them anyway. Habit, I suppose. Ellen came outside wrapped in her long cardigan, the one with the elbow patches. She had a mug in her hand, and that soft edge to her voice she used when she wasn't sure how a conversation might go. "Mom?" I looked up. "Yes, sweetheart?" She stepped closer, glanced down at the clippings by my feet. "Where have you been going lately?" "I mean, the boxes. Some of your things are missing." Your books, the photo albums. I straightened up slowly, wiped my hands on my gardening apron. Nowhere, I said. I just got out of your story. She blinked, clearly thrown by the phrasing. What does that mean? It means I've been living in a chapter I didn't write, in a house that no longer tells my version of things, so I decided to tell it somewhere else. Ellen was quiet for a long time. Her gaze moved over the garden, then back to me. For the first time in months, she didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften my meaning. I didn't know you felt that way, she said at last. You didn't need to. It wasn't yours to feel. A breeze stirred. The wind chime on the porch, the only one Peter hadn't removed, let out a low, mournful note. Are you angry with me? With us? No, I said. I'm just no longer waiting for a space in a house that's already been furnished with someone else's story. Her mouth tightened. I didn't mean to erase you. I know, I said, but it doesn't change the fact that I was being erased. She sat on the low brick wall near the hydrangeas. Her mug sat untouched. I thought having you here was helping, she murmured. With the kids, with the house. I thought we were, including you. You were accommodating me, I said gently. That's not the same. The porch light clicked on behind us, yellow glow spilling across the gravel. She didn't cry. Ellen was never the crying kind, but her shoulders softened. Is there anything we can do now to, I don't know, bring it back? I bent to pick up the garden shears. No, I said, but maybe you can build something of your own, something the children will remember. Just don't expect it to come in a box. And with that, I walked past her into the house. No raised voice, no slammed doors, just the soft sound of a woman returning to her chosen quiet. The first morning after our conversation in the garden, I woke before sunrise. I no longer set an alarm. My body knew the hour. Years of homemaking had trained it to respond to the shifting light through sheer curtains and the low, expectant stillness of the early hour. The kitchen, usually cold and impersonal, felt strangely quiet, not empty, but paused, like it was waiting. I opened the cabinet. Gone were the bone china cups, the gilded saucers, the old blue plates. They had all found better places. What remained was functional, simple, modern. I took down one of the gray mugs, smooth and solid, indifferent to memory. I filled the kettle, not the old copper one. That, too, was gone now. I used the electric version they had purchased. It beeped once, impersonal but efficient. Tea. Lemon. A small plate with a slice of cinnamon toast. I carried it out to the porch. There I placed the mug on the little folding table and sat in the old wicker chair. The cushion had faded to the color of sea fog. The wind moved lightly over my arms. A mourning dove called from the neighbor's hedge. For the first time in months, I didn't wait for someone to join me. I didn't hope for conversation or company. I drank my tea slowly, eyes tracing the horizon where the sun was beginning to peek over the row of roof lines. Then a sound, footsteps on gravel. I turned my head to find Mrs. Langston from 3 houses down. She wore a lavender jacket and carried a pie dish under one arm. Her white curls caught the sunlight. Grace, she said, I saw your lights on. Thought you might like some company. I smiled. Come sit. I have cinnamon toast. She settled into the second chair. We didn't speak for a while, just ate, sipped. The pie sat on the table between us, untouched but warm. Later, as we finished our second cups, she said, Funny thing about these quiet mornings, you think they'll be lonely, but they're not if you've built them yourself. I nodded. That morning, I realized something. I wasn't preserving the past anymore. I wasn't even mourning it. I was creating something new, smaller, quieter, mine. And one day, perhaps someone would sit where I had sat, sip tea from a gray mug, and feel the weight of memory settle around them gently. Not as burden, but as warmth. There's a small plaque in the entrance of Lincoln Elementary now. It's no bigger than a postcard. Mounted beneath a glass case, next to a rotating exhibit of photographs and heirlooms, it reads, Grace Ellen Weatherly Collection, donated in memory of those who kept the flame. The china is there, not all of it, just enough to tell the story. It sits beside hand-labeled spice jars, embroidery stitched with dates, and a photo of Robert in his Navy uniform. There's even one of me, 25 years old, holding Ellen on my hip, both of us caught in a blur of sunlight and laughter on the front lawn of a house that still exists. Children pass it every day. Most walk by without a second glance. Some stop. Some read. Some ask questions. Natalie told me one fourth-grade boy stood for 5 minutes just staring at the sugar bowl. When asked why, he said, My grandma has one just like that. I thought it was just old, but now I think maybe it's part of something. Yes, that's the word, part, because I'm not gone, not faded, not tucked in some attic box or folded into a drawer no one opens. I'm a carrier, the kind of woman who walks the same floorboards long enough to leave a sound in them, who makes tea in the morning not because someone's coming, but because someone once did, and because someone someday will. Peter still cooks with minimalist pans. Ellen still paints the walls in colors that remind her of catalog pages. The children grow taller each season, speaking a language of gadgets and updates I can barely keep up with. But none of it bothers me now. Let them sit in their clean kitchen. Let them celebrate the new, the sleek, the forgettable. Because I've given the past a home, not a shrine, a heartbeat. And me, I am not a relic. I am still walking, still speaking, still pouring tea. And every time someone asks who Grace Weatherly was, the answer will not be silence.